All right, I have with me Mr. Navid Mohebbi, an Iran expert and a democracy advocate who has been following the goings-on in Iran and has been keeping up to date on the history and what's been going on, especially with these new protests. So, first of all, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Awesome, awesome. So, before we get started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
My name is Navid Mohebbi. I was born and raised in Iran. I left the country when I was 20 years old. Back in Iran, I was a blogger before the age of social media, writing about politics, human rights, and stuff like that. I was arrested in Iran because of my advocacy work three times. And ultimately, I was handed a 3-year sentence, and I had to basically f flee the country. I went to Turkey. I was there for 2 years. I applied for asylum, and it took 2 years to be granted asylum from United States. And I came here in 2013, and since then. I went to school, George Washington University and University of Massachusetts. I studied international relations and security studies. I worked for State Department as a Persian media analyst, and I also worked for DHS shortly. And I've also been working with many DC think tanks, for example, as a political director for National Union for Democracy in Iran, an Iranian American organization that advocates for a U.S. policy towards Iran that is rooted in human rights and democracy. And I oftentimes advise governments and U.S. government, and I'm involved with the media sphere as well.
Okay, awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah, yeah, that's cool. So I want to get into what's been going on in Iran, but before we get there, I kind of want to hear your story a little bit because I think that would kind of set the stage to just for how this regime works. So you were a political prisoner. Can you kind of walk us
Yeah.
through that? Tell me about your experience, being persecuted for basically expressing your opinions.
Actually, there's an unwritten rule between like many diaspora activists and those who have been in jail. Like when we are given the chance to talk about ourselves, we would rather not to focus on ourselves and talk about people inside the country, because what they are going through is deeply concerning. But out of
Mm,
respect for your audience, I just, quickly, maybe like 2 sentences, I'll explain like
sure.
what happened to me. So, I grew up watching Voice of America Persian, like a U.S. government-funded TV outlet that is broadcasted to many countries, mainly countries that live under dictatorship.
Mm,
So, growing up watching Voice of America, it was during President Bush era, like early 2000. Since a very young age, that actually opened my eye to what's happening in Iran, the idea of democracy, human rights, and learning more about the regime that we live in, even though I was maybe like 8, 9, 10,
mm,
but still I was, very interested in learning about what's happening in the world. And I would say that watching Voice of America, as well as many other diaspora outlets based in Los Angeles, broadcasting to Iran, and when we would watch these programs through satellites, and it was illegal in Iran, but we would
mm,
illegally, install satellites and watch those programs. Voice of America was more of a professional channel, like just explaining what's happening and exposing the regime. But the satellites outlets, coming from Los Angeles, that many Iranians live in Los Angeles, the
mhm.
biggest, diaspora community of Iranians. I think more than 1 million Iranians live in Los Angeles or California broadly. And they were like more like advocacy-based organization asking people to rebel against the regime. And most of them, escaped Iran through 1979 revolution. And they had uh, nationalist tendencies or pro-monarchist tendencies. I can explain this, political dynamic later.
Sure.
Uh, so watching those programs had a very positive impact on me, and I think kind of, shaped my worldview, being engaged in pro-democracy advocacy and having a normal country, just like United States and other Western countries. I think Iranian people never gets used to living under the Islamic Republic, even though it's been 47 years.
Mm,
The values of Iranians and their aspirations is just it's not compatible with the ideas that this regime has. Yes, this regime came to power through popular uprising, and most of people that participated in the revolution in 1979 were Islamist and Marxist groups.
mm,
Um, so, so even though back then there was dissatisfaction with the government of the Shah, but his opponents were like, I don't know, 1,000 times worse than the Shah himself.
mm.
That's why I think even though many Iranians participated in that revolution, but quickly they realized that what a mistake they have made.
Yeah. And
And
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
go no, ask your question.
I was just going to say that. I mean, that's what I've read that a lot of Iranians they had no idea what this regime was going to be like when they advocated for it. They just knew that they didn't like the government that they were currently living under, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
it turned out it turned out a lot worse. But
Yeah, I would say like before the revolution, we had social freedoms, individual freedoms. Women didn't have to wear hijab. We had a
Mhm,
very friendly relationship with Israel, United States. Iran had one of the strongest military in the world, and we were connected to the outside world. The only issue was that we didn't have political, openness in
mhm,
the country. But there's a catch. The majority of Shah's opponents were Marxists and Islamists who didn't even believe in democracy, human rights, women's rights. Their idea of freedom was freedom for us, freedom for our ideas. That's why as soon as they took over Iran, at first Marxists and Islamists worked together, usually, and the Shah used to call them the unholy alliance of the left, that there are only alliance of red and black. So
mm,
red representing Marxists and black representing Islamists. So it's a very famous quote by the Shah of Iran. And there was a tiny, tiny, very small uh, nationalists who were pro-democracy, but they weren't like necessarily anti-Shah. They wanted reform, not revolution,
mhm,
but they didn't have any base of support back then. And I would say this, religious figures before the revolution were respected members of our societies. People believe that Ayatollah Khomeini, he's an Ayatollah, he's a man of God, he never lies. I mean, we should trust him. But no one could imagine what a monster he would become later on. But as soon as Marxists and Islamists took power, they slaughtered many members of the Shah government, and they started cracking down on Iranian artists, Iranian singers. That's why the majority of Iranian singers are based in California and they're not allowed to perform in their own country because in the eyes of Marxists and Islamists, these artists represented the Western way of life and not compatible with the ideology of the revolution. And then Khomeini went after the Marxists, the same group that participated in the revolution, colluded with Islamists, and Khomeini slaughtered them as well. And now some of them are part of the opposition, but they don't have the upper hand though.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully that changes. So, I mean, let's fast forward to now and what's been going on. Before I get into my more detailed questions, well, what's the general sense from what you're seeing on the ground, or from what you're hearing on the ground? Because I know you're probably hearing from a lot of people when they can, because I know they have that internet blackout. But
Yeah.
what's your assessment of what's been going on the ground with this particular protest?
So this round of protests started in December 28th, 2025, and it continued for almost 2 weeks. It started with a shock events, the fluctuation of Iranian currency. Iranian currency right now is the least valuable currency in the world, and people in the bazaar or shopkeepers, they were not able to, properly engage in transactions, in businesses, because they would buy something today and the price would be different tomorrow.
Mm,
So they were the first part of a group of Iranians that started the protest. But the protest quickly, within hours or within a day, expanded to uh, other segments of Iranian society. And similar to what happened over the past years, because we have had four other uprisings other than this one, it quickly turned into a political movement to bring down the regime. I can explain why, even though the protest movements, the one that started from December 2017, we had another uprising in after shutting down of no, we had another uprising in November 2019, which 1,500 people were killed, and
mm,
then we had another uprising in 2022 after the death of Mahsa Amini, a girl who was killed because of having not having proper hijab or scarf
right.
on, if you remember that. So, and one of the main slogan was "Woman, Life, Freedom." Even though all these protests started with a shock event, but these protests quickly turned into a political one, asking for the collapse of the regime. Why? Because people understand that as long as this regime is in power, their economic situation only gets worse.
Mm,
Their way of and the government is not going to loosen up on its draconian laws and restrictions on Iranian people, on young people. And Iran foreign policy, expansionist foreign policy, and its fight against United States and Israel is not going to stop. Why we have issues? Because Khamenei has an idea that we have to destroy Israel and United States is our enemy. So he wants to fight with them through proxies throughout the region, throughout Middle
right.
East. I'm sure your audience, you know, they know about Hamas, Hezbollah, and Ansarul Hezbollah in Yemen, Houthis. So Iran is basically funding them in order to fight United States, in order to expand its Islamist ideology, because the Iranian regime doesn't believe in the concept of nation state. And Khamenei views himself as the leader of the Islamic world. So they are an expansionist regime. And what is the consequence of that? International sanctions against the regime.
Hmm.
United States has been imposing sanctions against the regime, and a few months ago in September, UN also triggered a snapback sanction against the regime. So, but the economic issues in Iran is not just because of sanctions. The regime loves to blame everything on Israel and
Yeah.
United States and the West, but it's about their mismanagement. It's about plundering Iranian people's wealth. It's about 2% of top regime officials who are living a lavish lifestyle. And it's about mismanaging the country and the country's resources. Why a country that has one of the largest oil and gas reserves in the world should be having an economic situation like this? And the Iranian people's issue is not just economic. They have political demands.
Hmm.
They want social freedoms. They want individual freedoms. They want to engage in electoral process in their country. They want democracy. So the problem in Iran, the issue in Iran cannot be explained like saying it's just because of economic issues. No, it's not a one factor. It's a combination of factors. And guess what? People gave the regime 20 years. People gave chances to the so-called reformist faction of the regime. After 20 years, the Islamic Republic was founded. We had a faction within the regime that promised reform, not like a total reform, a democracy, but easing restrictions on different fronts. And people gave them chance for 20 years. They participated in the election, and you probably heard like about reformists in Iran, principalists in Iran, or hardliners in Iran. So we had this game, principalists, hardliners versus reformists. And people ultimately realized that, well, they are the same. They are no different from one another. But
Mm,
there was one difference. When they, for example, the current administration right now is a reformist, and they go in the West, many of them speak perfect English, and they pretend that they are reformists. They don't agree with everything what is happening in Iran, but they are basically acting as an apologist for the regime.
oh,
You
okay.
know, that's their game. That's why in December 2017, the main chant was no reformist, no hardliner. The game is over. Down with the Islamic Republic. We
Mm,
are fed up with your this game of different factions, and unfortunately, many even in the U.S. government engage with them, believe them, especially during, after President Bush, for 8 years, the policy was engaging with the government. And if we have a deal with the Iranian government, it's going to empower reformists.
mhm,
But guess what? After we signed the Iran nuclear deal, after United States released Iran frozen assets, after Iran was able to um, sell its oil without sanctions. After 6 months, I mean, for 6 months, we had honeymoon in Iran
mhm,
economically. And then people realized that people ask, where did the money go? Why our
mm,
situation, why we're not seeing any difference in our country? We had the first round of protests after JCPOA was signed in December 2017. So why I emphasize so much on December 2017 uprising, which unfortunately didn't garner any attention from the international media
yeah, I
outlets.
didn't remember
Because
hearing about that at all.
when we are talking about Iran, everyone refers back to Green Movement in 2009.
Mm,
Well, a lot of things happened since then. A lot of things happened since then. And December 2017 was a tipping point because it was the first time in the history of Islamic Republic that in more than 100 cities, people took to the streets. And the chance, unlike 2009, wasn't like, where is my vote, or a fraudulent election between reformists or hardliner. It was about the end of the Islamic Republic. That's how the discourse in Iran changed. And since then, because the same reason that brought people to the street in 2017 exists today.
mm,
The same underlying issues, even worse. It's only getting worse year by year. So when we are asking why Iranian protesting, I say they have been protesting since December 2017, but each time regime slaughters them.
yeah.
But I have also say this. From 2017 up to now, which we had 5 uprisings, each time these protests are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They used to say, oh, it's just the middle class or upper class or lower class, the working class, teachers, the students, unions, everyone is protesting. And what we saw over the past 3 weeks in Iran, the largest protest in the history of Islamic Republic and the history of Iran as a country. And unfortunately, the level of brutality that we witness in Iran by the regime, you can't find an example of that since World War II.
Wow.
About 12,000 to 20,000 protesters were killed. if I want to put this in perspective, I said the same thing when I had uh, a similar interview with Laura Trump on Fox News. Imagine how many people were killed after 2001 September 11 attack,
Right.
and how many people were killed after October 7. Well, if you combine that and multiply by five, that's the number of casualties we have in Iran.
Yeah.
So you
In
can
just a
only
couple of weeks.
imagine it's a couple of weeks. And most of that happened in 2 days. I explained why in those two
Okay.
days. Um, so you can imagine how Iranian people are feeling right now. So you remember perhaps like how Americans felt after 9/11, how Israelis felt after Hamas massacre in Israel. Multiply that by five. And there are also other aggravating factors as well. Americans knew that their government is going to defend them. They didn't have economic issues, social issues. So in addition to the brutality that Iranians experience, all the issues that they have been protesting exist as well on top of that. So the agony and hopelessness and the shock and trauma that Iranian people are feeling, I mean, can be described in words. And guess what? Internet is shut down. It has been shut down for over 8 days. That's also unprecedented in Iranian history. Maybe in the world, maybe it only happens in North Korea. I don't know. I don't find any example of that. For 8 days in a row, internet is shut down because the regime doesn't want the world to see what they have done.
So let me
But
ask. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. No, no, ask questions.
So I wanted
Yeah,
to
stop me.
ask.
No, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. I wanted to ask, amid all of this, um, how do how do average Iranian people in Iran feel about the United
Mhm.
States and Israel? Because I remember like back in the day seeing videos of Iranians chanting death to America. And I'm like, I wonder if they really reflect what the average Iranian thinks. How do they feel about the West in this whole thing?
I always say that one positive consequence or outcome of the Islamic Republic is that it made Iranian society more secular,
Hmm.
less religious, and more pro-West
Mm,
because they have seen over the past 47 years the consequence of fighting with the United States, the consequence of challenging the international order, the consequence of expansionist foreign policy, the consequence of, the chance that you just mentioned, death to America. What was the outcome of that? Did it bring bread to the table?
mm.
No.
It's always the
So
economy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, sanction. If you want to fight with a superpower, there's consequences for that, right?
Hmm.
So, uh, but Iranians also, as a nation, Iranian society, I think they don't have animosity towards United States. I would say it's one of the most pro-West, pro-US society in the Middle East.
Mm.
One of the I remember in 2019 protests and other smaller protests, one of the chant was from workers. Our enemy is right here. They lie that it's United States.
Mm.
دشمن ما همینجاست دروغ میگن آمریکاست. That was one of the slogans. And Iranians, because of their feelings toward United States and friendship that they see potentially in United States, because they experienced that before the revolution, they always had this kind of expectation that United States, as a moral authority, as a superpower, is going to come to their aid. You see chants, for example, in the Green Movement in 2009, they called on Obama. One of the slogans was this, Obama, Obama, are you with them or with us?
Mm.
And President Obama was heavily criticized for, not supporting the protest movements in Iran. What you are saying right now, people changing the street, naming after President Trump, sending him messages. Why? Because they understand that in order to bring down the regime, a defenseless nation. Sorry, I live close to the White House, and they always,
You live in the
make
swamp.
noise. Yeah. Um, where do you live, by the way?
I'm in Louisiana.
Okay, very cool. I think that's a better place.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
so so people so people understand that in order to bring down the regime, we are facing a situation like this. A defenseless population that goes to the streets protesting empty-handed versus a regime that is armed to the teeth and they're willing to kill to the last person. They are brutal, they are shameless, they don't care about human rights of their own citizen. They killed like many Israelis, through Hamas, and they killed many Americans. You can only imagine how they treat their own people. So they
Hmm.
don't care about livelihood of Iranians. And so that's why people understand that in order to bring down the regime, yes, this is our fight. This is a fight that Iranians should fight and win. But the international community's help is necessary, absolutely necessary. Why? Because it shifts the power dynamic. If we have US support or the West support, and if they crush regime's repressive capabilities, and then Iranian can finish the job. So basically, Iranians are not asking United States to send, boots on the ground, similar to what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Hmm.
They are saying that this is a regime change led by Iranian people, but with the international support. That's the distinction that I like to make between Iraq-style regime change and Iranian people-led regime change. That's two different dynamics.
Sure.
So that's basically what the US did after World War II in Eastern European countries. You help them. If a nation wants to fight, we help them. We provide support, different types of support. It could be military support, financial support, providing internet access for Iranians, for example, through Starlink, and
Right.
so many other ways. The US government has so many options. But that's a distinction that Iranians want Americans to understand, that we are leading this regime change. We are fighting on the ground.
Yeah. And so you were
Yeah,
mentioning that Iranians, don't aren't necessarily asking for the US to send boots on the ground. I mean, because that could open up a whole other can of worms. But what
yes.
type of assistance are they looking for from the US and the rest of the international community? Like in specifics, like, well, what are they wanting these countries to do to help them spearhead this regime change?
There are so many options, but this time around, they're also asking for military intervention. But what type of military intervention? Let's first talk about other options that US can help. For example, right now, internet is shut down in Iran. Less than 2% of Iranians have access to internet. Many of them are pro-regime folks. Um, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. And one way that US can help is to send Starlink to Iran. Starlink, owned by Elon Musk.
Hmm.
That helps Iranian get access to internet. Right now, we only have 50,000 Starlink equipment in Iran, and they also have to pay for monthly payment. It's very expensive for them. So what the U.S. government did, President Trump picked up the phone and spoke with Elon Musk. Elon Musk said, "Well, I'm not going to charge you anything." So that was a very good step. But U.S. government can also purchase and send more Starlink to Iran. They know how to do it. They don't need my advice on how to smuggle Starlink to Iran. The other way is that to increase sanctions on the Iranian regime, even though we have a maximum pressure policy in place on paper, the
Hmm.
US government is not properly enforcing oil sanctions. So the regime is able to sell oil to China. 91% of Iranian oil goes to China. So they're making money, they're making revenue, they're able to fund their repressive capabilities,
Hmm.
machinery, and uh, you can reform, for example, Voice of America, which is in a very dire situation. It has a very bad, manager. Nobody watches that VOA. But during my time, when I was growing up in Iran, VOA was a, great outlet. But unfortunately, that's not the case anymore with the new leadership. And that's something that many Iranians are asking, reform VOA. But there are so many ways US can help. But for the military part, because the regime committed a massacre, it's crime against humanity.
Yeah.
There is legal and moral justification for intervention, the same way that, for example, NATO intervened in Bosnia and Kosovo, saving the lives of Iranians. Thousands of Iranians have been arrested. You are seeing confessions every other day. Many of them, unfortunately, will be sentenced to death. So what Iranians are asking is military intervention from United States, bomb the hell out of them, bomb the hell out of, their headquarters, and targets individuals responsible for these crimes, the leaders. That's what they're asking. But they didn't ask military intervention during the last round of uprising, which 550 people were killed. But right now we are seeing a catastrophe in Iran. And what is painful for many Iranian is that we don't see a bipartisan support for Iranians in this fight. Many media, many activists, when you're looking at, campuses in the United States, you don't see any protest in solidarity with Iranians. You don't see like many intellectuals, global intellectuals, condemning the regime's atrocities without injecting their own agenda into it.
Hmm.
Um, so something has changed this time. They're asking for military intervention quickly. Is that this madness has to stop. This regime must be punished. And I remember, I don't remember, but I read about it. President Clinton was asked, what is your one of your regrets, your biggest regrets
Hmm.
from your presidency? He said, I was the only person in the world that could stop the genocide in Rwanda, and I could do it easily, but I didn't act on it.
Mm.
He could he could have saved 300,000 lives. Um, I'm hoping that when the international community look back to what happened in Iran, they don't regret their decision. It's
Mm.
time for action. Yes, we don't have to see the images and the videos of atrocities in Iran in order to earn people's sympathy. That's journalists' job, that's media's job to report on what's happening in Iran. There are activists inside Iran. They're sending these reports. We have videos, we have pictures, we have to talk about it. It's it's a it's a test for the international community, honestly, to be honest with you. 20,000 people, that's unprecedented in the history of, I mean, over the past, 80 years.
It's such a
I
crazy
think the
number.
world hasn't seen anything. Yeah, yeah. And more than 20,000 people were arrested as well. They're in jail, they're being tortured, and Iranians feel helpless.
Mm.
Somebody has to do something to help them to stop this madness. But we are hearing that U.S. military assets are heading into the Middle East, to the region. Let's see what happens. But Iranians definitely expect that, expect United States and Israel to intervene and help Iranian people and stop this regime. But they are also involved in this fight as well. They're not asking you to do the job for them. They are involved. They are
They're
sacrificing
already out in the
their
streets.
lives. Yeah, and as I said, I don't know, we were cut off, so I'm not sure if I mentioned it. That's in the interest of national interest of U.S. government. Iran has a great potential in terms of oil and gas. We have the largest oil and gas. Our oil is better than Venezuela because it's cheaper. It's I mean, you have to talk in a language that
I see what you did
US.
there.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, yes, we have a lot of oil and gas. Europe wants our gas, and US wants our oil. And Iranians want to have a partnership with the United States after 47 years of animosity. And in addition to that, Iran used to be US partner in the region. Back then, you wouldn't see US troops in Bahrain, in Saudi, in UAE, US government, I mean, this administration says, we should bring back our troops home. Well, before the revolution, Iran was the guardian of the region.
Hmm.
US didn't have to send its troops there. So Iran can play that role again. So your troops, I'm an American. I mean, I consider myself as an American. So when I say you or your, I'm talking to a broader audience.
Yeah.
Um, that's beneficial for the United States. And also, we have Iran ballistic missile issue, Iran's nuclear program issue, Iran's terrorism, Iranian regime interfering in the U.S. election, Iranian regime, engaging in death threats against U.S. president and other government officials, Iranian government hacking hospitals, the children hospitals in the United States. So this regime is a pain in the ass for the
Mm.
Iranian, for United States, for the West. And now that people are protesting, they're sacrificing, that's the moment for the United States to intervene and help them to finish the job. That's my argument.
No, I hear you. I hear you. So last question, because I know you got some stuff to do. You mentioned, the media not covering this as much, and I didn't think about that until you said it. And I'm thinking, yeah, I haven't seen quite as much media coverage in this protest as I did in 2022. Now, I see a lot of it on social media, and a lot of it's because I'm
Oh,
looking
yeah.
for it. But when it comes
Yeah.
to like regular news outlets, not so
Mainstream
much.
media.
Why do you think that is?
So I'm trying to be nonpartisan. Okay. Um, well, unfortunately, after President Obama took over, Iran issue has become um, a partisan issue. It was about engagement, diplomacy versus sanction and containment.
Hmm.
Um, for many, many years, especially after JCPOA was signed, um, Democrats in the United States, they wanted to have a deal with Iranian governments, and they hesitated to criticize the Iranian regime for human rights abuses because they were concerned that if we talk about human rights, the regime is going to get mad. We're not going to have a deal. That was the same reason that President Obama uh, didn't intervene or didn't even issue a statement of support during Green Movement because he wanted to have a nuclear deal. So, that would, make the regime angry. So why we should do that?
That's
So
true.
for many years, that was the main discourse from Democrats. Fortunately, since 4 years ago, especially after the protest of 2022, Mahsa Amini, Woman Life Freedom, you see changes. Even Biden administration, after trying for 1 year, didn't want to revive JCPOA anymore. They got a
Mm.
little bit tougher. Um, and so we saw some positive changes. Okay, and no one now is talking about negotiating with the regime except for some fringe elements. So that was a positive shift. Also, um, the anti-colonial, anti-West, blame America first movement, they don't see Iranian cause as their cause because when they are listening to people's chants, they don't blame United States. They love the West. They love United States. So many leftist movements, parties, and groups, they don't see Iran as their cause because Iran wants to be friend with United States and the West, be
I
part of the
see.
international community. That doesn't align with their priorities, I would say. They are
Mm.
asking President Trump for help. We shouldn't give Trump a win, you know. That's the thinking. Um, and That's why, in US campuses, there is a protest. You remember for Palestine, for
Yeah.
you know, protest movement. But you see nothing. And that's very upsetting for many Iranians because they believe that human rights and democracy for Iran should be a nonpartisan issue. That's part of America's legacy, supporting, you know, democracy movements and, allowing countries to join the international community, whereas Iran is an isolated country. So we have that issue. You don't see much emphasis on regime change. Iranians want to get rid of the regime. They try to downgrade the scope of this protest. They are protesting because of economic issues. No, they're not protesting because of economic issues. If you want to know what Iranians want, listen to the chants in the street. And Iranian regime also has many apologists in the West, discussed as Iran analysts, Iran experts, you know, so that makes it harder. That's why you're not seeing, many mainstream media reporting on Iran, but the social media change a lot of things.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably right now it's the best place to go to learn about what's going on in Iran. But I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about this because I mean, there's a lot that I don't know and there's a lot that my audience doesn't know. And hopefully we can get you back on again soon because I know there's going to be more
Absolutely.
developments because I feel like I only scratched the surface of the things that I wanted to ask you. So we definitely got to do this again.
Sure,
But
sure.
yeah,
I
but
would be
before
happy to.
yeah, yeah. And before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find your work, all that good stuff.
I appear on, media and podcasts such as yourself, and you can find me on X, my first and my last name, as you can see on this screen, Navidmohebbi, Navid Mohebbi on X.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining, and
Thank you
we'll
so
do this
much for
again really soon.
thank you for having me on.